Hello students, today we are going to discuss about water, the functions, requirements, dehydration and intoxication. Water is an important chemical which does not get classified as a nutrient, but at the same time it constitutes 50 to 65% of the adult body weight. It is defined as a universal biological solvent. It is a fluid in which all life processes occur. It participates in biochemical reactions. Water content varies from tissue to tissue. For example, teeth might have only 5% water, but a striated muscle can have even up to 80% water. If we just look at this figure, it will show us different functions of water. It regulates body temperature, it lubricates joints, it lessens the burden on the kidneys and liver by flushing out the waste products. It carries nutrients and oxygen at the cellular level. It moistens tissues, it protects the body and organs and tissues. It helps in preventing constipation. But if we look into the detail, we can classify the functions of water. The first most important being it quenches thirst. It is a solvent for innumerable solutes, lipoproteins and other biological compounds both within and outside the cell. It carries nutrients and oxygens to all the cells in the body. It keeps blood and other fluids in liquid state so that they can flow. It maintains structural and the functional capacity of every cell. It participates in all chemical reactions. It helps in digestion and it prevents constipation. It helps to eliminate byproducts and waste products from the body. It regulates body temperature through evaporation in the form of sweat. It keeps the mucous membranes moist, particularly in lungs and the respiratory tract, mouth and the intestinal tract. It acts as a lubricant and cushions the joints with the help of a synovial fluid. It also serves as a shock absorber inside the eyes, spinal cord and in the amniotic sac which surrounds the fetus during pregnancy. It works as a moisturizer to improve the texture and the appearance of the skin. It dilutes any potentially harmful and toxic substances in the bladder and excretes them through urine. Thus, we see that water plays multiple roles inside our body. The body fluids are divided into two major components. The intracellular fluid, that is the fluid which is inside the cell. The extracellular fluid which is outside the cell. The extracellular fluid is further divided into plasma fluid, interstitial fluid, lymph circulation and the secretions of the lacrimal, pancreas, liver and the gastrointestinal mucosa. If we look at the intracellular fluid, it accounts for about 45% of the body weight. It predominantly contains potassium, organic anions and also proteins. Its composition is maintained and regulated by the body. The major role of intracellular fluid is it is a solvent for various molecules within the cells. It is the medium in which all metabolic reactions occur again within the cell. It plays an active role in various cellular reactions. It sustains cellular integrity. Extracellular fluid, it can be divided again into four types. The first one is the interstitial fluid. It is the liquid which is found between the cells or the interstices of all body tissues. It contains electrolytes, amino acids, sugars, fatty acids, coenzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters, salts and along with it even the waste products. The composition varies in different tissues in different areas of the body. The ionic composition of the interstitial fluid determines the concentration of ions in both intracellular as well as the extracellular fluid. It also serves as a buffer against changes occurring in the plasma volume that is influenced by water or the fluid intake. Next is the plasma or the intravascular fluid. It is essential for maintaining organ perfusion, transporting oxygen and nutrients to all the cells. It helps in transferring hormones, cytokines and also the neurotransmitters. It is a fluid of dense connective tissue, cartilage and bones. Fluid in these tissues do not exchange fluid and electrolytes. Next is the transcellular fluid. It is collection formed by the transport or the secretory activity of cells. Fluids found in salivary glands, pancreas, mucous membrane of the respiratory as well as the GI tract are the transcellular fluid. So this is a diagrammatic representation of how the body fluid is divided: intracellular fluid, the extracellular which is taken up by the interstitial fluid, plasma, lymph and the transcellular fluid. ICF and ECF also contain two major cations. These are sodium and potassium. So when we discuss water, we also need to look a little bit into sodium and potassium. So if we look at the functions of sodium, it is predominantly present in the extracellular fluid. It helps in maintaining fluid and electrolyte balance and thereby helps in maintaining the pH of the body. It is required for nerve impulse transmission. It also assists in the transport of certain nutrients into the body cells like glucose and amino acids, and this point has to be kept in mind. During pregnancy, for any reason, a woman has hypertension, the salt intake is not totally cut down. Salt intake has to be normal because sodium is going to play all these important roles: transmission of nerve impulses, and most importantly, it is needed for the active transport of two major nutrients, glucose as well as amino acids. Similarly, if we look at the functions of potassium, it is a major cation of the intracellular fluid. It influences muscle activity. It is essential for growth and building up of cells. It acts like a catalyst for several metabolic reactions and it helps in maintaining the osmotic pressure of the cell. Sources of water. The body's need for water are met through multiple ways. One is directly ingesting water and beverages. It can be in the form of straight water, it can be milk, tea or coffee. Then there is some amount of water which is naturally present in foods. Fruits and vegetables have high water content as compared to cereals and pulses. Then there is some amount of water which is released during the oxidation of foodstuffs inside the body. If we look at the moisture content of some of these foods, we can see that nuts and oilseeds have water content which is less than 10%. Cereals, it is anywhere between 10 to 14%. As against this, fats and oils do not contain water except butter. Sugar has negligible amount of water. However, green leafy vegetables contain very high amount of moisture, almost 73 to 95%. Watermelon, a very commonly consumed fruit, contains almost 96% water. Papaya contains 91%, while pomegranate contains 78%. Milk, again which is a liquid, contains 81 to 90% water. The water variation is because the fat is the major component which decides the water content. Again, the water that is consumed also has to be lost from the body. The water is lost predominantly through kidneys because it depends upon the amount of waste that must be dissolved and removed from the body. This facultative water excretion by the kidney is in addition to the obligatory losses, and it varies according to the body needs and water intake. Then there is another category what is known as the obligatory losses. This is for the maintenance of the physico-chemical equilibrium, that is the losses in the feces through respiration and the insensible loss through perspiration which occurs regardless of the quantity of water intake. And in a country like ours, where for about 8 to 10 months the weather is going to be very hot, we tend to lose quite a lot of water through perspiration. Then insensible perspiration accounts for a relatively constant amount of water loss that is proportional to the body surface area. The water evaporates from the skin and the water loss is not noticeable. This is important for maintaining the body temperature. The water loss by visible perspiration is highly variable, ranging from 0 in cool weather to several liters during warm weather. Again, this point has to be kept in mind by athletes, because during training, when there is a severe muscle exercise, they tend to sweat and lose lot of water. They have to take adequate care to see that they do not get dehydrated. Lungs also expel water through air. Any condition that increases the perspiration also increases water loss through respiration. Now, if we just have a look at the water that is ingested and excreted throughout the day, mind you, this is just an average figure that is given. We take water in the form of liquid like water, coffee, tea, etc., which is roughly equal to 1200 grams. We take water in the form of foods, which is roughly equal to 900 ml or grams, and there is some amount of water that is released during the biochemical reactions that equates to about 250 ml. But see the amount of water that is excreted. In urine, we lose about 1350. In stools or feces, it is about 200 grams, and there is some amount of water which is lost from lungs, that is about 400 grams. And from the skin, the insensible loss is roughly about 400. The balance sheet meets. We take in about 2350 grams and we excrete 2350 grams. Even if we look at the way the water is ingested, it can be seen that we take water, food about 2 liters, but see the amount of water that is poured into the digestive system. Saliva, the gastric secretions, the liver, the intestinal secretions, but by the time the water is in the end part of the small intestines and in the colon, most of the water gets reabsorbed, and the water that is lost in feces is just about 150 to 200 ml. In spite of variation in intake and the weather condition, body has inbuilt mechanisms to regulate the water balance. The two major ways are: 1. Regulation of fluid intake through changes in the thirst sensation. The second is regulation of fluid loss through kidneys. Water flows passively, what is known as osmosis, from one area or compartment of the body to another, allowing the larger volumes of fluid in the cells and the area around the cells to act as reservoirs to protect the more critical but smaller volumes of fluid in the blood vessels from getting dehydrated. Let us look into the thirst mechanism or the neural mechanism. A deficient intake of water with continuing obligatory losses cause concentration of body fluids with respect to solutes and a rise in osmotic pressure. This causes the drawing of water from the intracellular fluid into the extracellular component. The dehydration of the cells seem to be the main stimulus for their mechanisms through osmoreceptors and the nerves of the mouth and pharynx, and they respond to the dryness of the mouth and pharynx. Kidneys. The renal tubules reabsorb electrolytes and regulate their levels continuously at a much faster rate. When too much of fluid is lost, the concentration of the electrolytes in the ECF increases because there is a loss from ICF. This causes the water to be reabsorbed from the saliva. The resulting dry sensation stimulates thirst and the subsequent fluid intake. The thirst is what makes a man look for water and quench his thirst. Hypothalamus too responds to the elevated levels of sodium content in the blood and responds in two ways. One, it stimulates the thirst mechanism, and it signals the pituitary gland to release anti-diuretic hormone, the ADH or the vasopressin. It influences the kidneys to reabsorb more water and restores the normal blood volume. Now, this is a very good figure where we can see how both in low water intake and in high water intake, how the kidneys help in restoring the water balance. Whenever there is a stimulus where there is a low water intake, there is dehydration, the plasma osmolarity increases. This influences the osmoreceptors in hypothalamus, which in turn stimulate the posterior pituitary to release antidiuretic hormone. This acts on kidneys and they increase the water reabsorption, thereby decreasing less water in urine. As against this, whenever there is excess water or overhydration, look at the similarity. Again, osmolarity decreases. It acts on the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which again stimulate the pituitary to decrease the production of antidiuretic hormone, which affect the kidneys. They decrease water reabsorption and more water is excreted in urine. Next component is the water depletion. This can occur due to reduced intake, that is, when there is water not available for drinking. Now, this is typically seen in several calamities like famines, floods, where there is insufficient water for an individual to drink. Sometimes there is inability to obtain water. Infants, elderly, patients, they may not have easy access to water. Sometimes there can be an underlying disease and there is inability to swallow, as is seen in the diseases of the mouth or the esophagus. Sometimes there can be increased losses, which can be due to hot environment, excessive exercise, fever, hyperthyroidism. Hyperthyroidism is known to increase the metabolic rate. So there is excessive loss of water from the skin. Then there can be loss from lungs, as is seen in fever. Fever also increases the metabolic rate, the body temperature rises, and again there is some loss of water. In high altitude also there is more loss of water. From the alimentary tract, because of vomitings or diarrhea. And again in diseases like diabetes, kidney disorders, and even diabetes insipidus, there is too much of loss in the urine. The effect of water depletion on dehydration. The first immediate symptom would be dry skin and tongue. Eyes are sunken and the skin loses elasticity. Urine output decreases. In fact, in small children and infant, that is one of the indicators to tell us whether the child is dehydrated or not. There is also a reduction in the volume of extracellular fluid and thereby the intracellular fluid. The electrolyte content also decrease. The osmotic pressure increases, the water from the intracellular fluid is lost, and there is a subsequent loss of both sodium and potassium. Treatment. Very rarely we come across a case where there is only water deprivation. Very often we also see that there is a loss of sodium and potassium along with water deprivation. Water and electrolytes have to be replaced in appropriate amounts. Household conditions provide us with many easy ways to substitute these things. For example, coconut water, rice water with salt, sago water with salt, lime juice, buttermilk, they can be given so that it replaces both water and electrolytes. Boiled and cold water with a pinch of salt and a little sugar can also help in restoring water and electrolyte balance. Of course, commercial ORS are also available, which contain sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarbonates, and a little amount of glucose. The next component is water excess or water intoxication. This occurs when the physiological balancing mechanism fails. Water is retained, causing toxic symptoms, and this is called water intoxication. It can occur due to rapid water intake when a person is extremely thirsty, or it can be because of injection of antidiuretic hormone, or it can be after surgery due to increased antidiuretic hormone secretion, or it can be even due to heart failure. It results in edema, that is, water is retained in the body and it appears like edema, that is, water retention in the body. This causes an increase in the extracellular fluid. This is typically seen in starvation and also in liver diseases. It is also associated with decreased formation of plasma albumin. Generalized edema is very commonly seen in kidney disorders like nephrotic syndrome. However, in this case, the underlying disease has to be treated if any, and then the edema can be targeted. So, in conclusion, we can say that water is an important non-nutrient compound essential for multiple body functions. Body maintains a fine balance between the intake and excretion of water. Even in conditions like dehydration and water intoxication, multiple hormones try to restore water and electrolyte balance. Adequate water must be consumed to avoid depletion, which for an adult is about 8 to 10 glasses per day in a hot tropical country like India. Thank you.